All right, so last time we started talking about pedigrees. And what a pedigree is, remember, was just a big family tree that we can use to follow the inheritance of different genetic traits. Right? So specifically, last time we looked at cystic fibrosis, when we followed how the trait of cystic fibrosis ran throughout one family. Okay, and cystic fibrosis, remember, was a recessive disorder. So recessive meaning you need two of the alleles for cystic fibrosis to actually show the disorder, and it's also an autosomal disorder, meaning it appears on the chromosomes that don't have to do with sex determination. So it's not on either the X or the Y chromosomes. It's on one of the other 44 chromosomes. Okay, and today we're going to look at a couple different patterns of inheritance and how that affects the pedigrees of it. Okay, so let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, and the first disorder that I want to talk about is something called Huntington's disease. Okay, and Huntington's disease, what that is, it's a genetic disorder that causes some of the nerves in your brain to start degenerating. Okay, a lot of times adults will have it, and they won't even know it because you don't see the symptoms until maybe you're 30 or 40 years old. Okay, and Huntington's disease, it's an autosomal dominant disorder. Right, so autosomal meaning it's on one of the normal chromosomes that don't have to do with sex, and then dominant meaning you only need one copy of the Huntington's allele to have the disorder. Okay, so let's say we represent the gene with the letter H. So big H would be having Huntington's, and then we could use a little h to signify someone who's healthy. Okay, so again, let's just start out our pedigree the same way we started out last time, right? So we just start out with two parents. So a mom and a dad, right? And let's say we just start out and say that our mom has Huntington's disease. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start making my key. So start making our key, and basically, remember, we use shaded in shapes to signify people with Huntington's. So like a colored in square or a colored in circle equals people with Huntington's, right? And then a non-colored in square or a non-colored in circle means people who are healthy. Okay, so I've got our key made, and I didn't signify in our key that squares are males and circles are females, but you guys already know this at this point. Okay, so let's continue on with our family. Okay, so we had our two parents, and let's say that they have 3 kids. Okay, so they have a kid, and a kid. All right, let's say first they have a son, right? And then they have 2 daughters after that. Okay, and then let's say the son that these 2 parents had, the son will also develop Huntington's at some point in their life. Okay, so we have 2 generations so far, right? So we have our first generation, which was our first 2 parents, and then we have our second generation, which is the first set of kids that are made. Okay, and right away we can start filling in some of the genotypes, right? So Huntington's disease is an autosomal dominant disorder, meaning people who have it have at least one big H allele, and people who don't have it have 2 little h alleles. Okay, so we can fill in some of the genotypes already. For example, this mom right here, she has Huntington's disease, meaning she has 1 big H. And then for now, we don't really know what her second allele is going to be. We just know that she's healthy. Okay, and for dad, we know that since he's healthy, since mom has Huntington's, she's either big H or big H little h, right? And dad right here, we know he's healthy, so he has to be little h. All right, and then we start looking at these kids. The 2 daughters are both healthy, so they're both little h. And then this son right here, we know that he's big H something else. Okay, so now, so for each of these kids, they have 2 little h alleles, right? They get 1 from their dad, right? So the other one that they get has to come from this mom. So we know this mom, her second allele has to be a little h, right? So we know that she has one of the healthy alleles that she can pass on, but she also has the Huntington's allele, which means she has the disorder. Okay, and then we know for this son, the second allele he gets has to be from his dad, and we know his dad can only pass on the little h, so his genotype also has to be big H, little h. Okay, and so what you can see in autosomal dominant inheritance, you usually see the genetic disorder in every generation. So if you see it in one generation, you'll probably see it at some point in the next. Okay, and if we were to continue on with our pedigree, let's say this son, this guy right here, he marries somebody. Oops, let me switch back to green. Right, so he marries someone outside the family, and he marries somebody healthy. Okay, since this woman is healthy, we know that she has to be little h, right? And so let's say they're going to have some kids. We don't know exactly how many at first, and it doesn't really matter at this point. But let's say we want to do a Punnett square for this cross, right? So our Punnett square would be, for this cross, it would be big H, cross little h, and we draw our square. Our square right here. And then what we would get is big H, little h, big H, and little h. Okay, so for these kids, half of them should have Huntington's disease, and then half of them should be healthy, right? Because we have half with Huntington's, half healthy. Okay, so if we were to draw that in, maybe we draw in 4 kids, and they have one Huntington's son, one healthy son, one healthy daughter, and then one daughter with Huntington's, right? So since it's an autosomal dominant disorder, it's much more common than an autosomal recessive disorder. That's why you can see it most of the time in all of the generations that are in a family, okay? So Huntington's disease, it follows an autosomal dominant pattern, and so it's more common to see than, say, cystic fibrosis, which was autosomal recessive, all right? And so far, we've looked at 2 autosomal disorders. And so what I want to do next is look at a sex-linked disorder, right? So sex-linked, meaning it's on one of the sex chromosomes. Specifically, we'll be talking about a disorder that's located on the X chromosome. Okay, and everybody's favorite X-linked disorder is hemophilia. Right, hemophilia. And again, remember that hemophilia is a disease where you can't clot your blood. So if you get a cut or something like that, you'll just continue to bleed and bleed profusely. You won't be able to stop. Okay, hemophilia, it's a sex-linked recessive disorder. Right, so the allele for having hemophilia would be X, because it's sex-linked. It's on the X chromosome, and then little h. So this would be having hemophilia, and then X, big H, we would use for a healthy allele. Right, and then you also have your Y for the Y chromosome for guys. All right, and let's see what this pedigree would look like. All right, so let's say we start out with 2 parents again. Okay, so we start out with a mom and a dad. Again, we want to make our key. All right, so circle equals healthy female. Colored in circle would be hemophiliac female. Empty square would be a healthy male, so healthy male. And then a colored in square would be a hemophiliac male. Okay, and so we start out with 2 healthy parents. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just start to fill in the genotypes. All right, and for sex-linked disorders, you really want to make sure that you're filling in the gender as well. Right, so for this male, we know that he has an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, and then since he's healthy, the allele on his X chromosome is going to be a big H. All right, and then for mom, she's going to be XX, because she's a female, and then we know she has one big H allele on one X, and then we don't really know about her second one yet. Right? We just know she's healthy, So she has one big H, but we don't know if she carries the gene for hemophilia. All right. And so let's say they start having kids. All right. So let's just say they have 4 kids. Okay. So we draw out our 4 kids. And we draw out that by chance they had 2 sons and then 2 daughters. Okay. And let's say one of the sons actually has hemophilia. Okay, and then the rest of the kids are all healthy. Okay, so now we can start filling in some more of the genotypes, right? So for the son who has hemophilia, first off, his gender is male, so we can fill out that he is XY, right? And we know that he has hemophilia, so on his X chromosome, he has the allele for hemophilia, so he's X little HY, right? And so we also know the genotype of this son right here, right? He's XY because he's a guy, and then he's healthy, so on his X chromosome, he has the big H allele, okay? And so for now, we can start filling in the genotype of mom, right? Because dad always passes on the Y chromosome to his sons, right? Because in order for them to be boys, he has to give them the Y chromosome. And what that really means is that the X chromosome that the sons get has to come from mom, right? So this son got the X big H allele from his mom, and so this son who has the X little h had to get an X little h from his mom. So we know mom has to be X big H, X little h, right? So we can say that mom is a carrier for the hemophilia gene on her X chromosome, right? And then for these 2 daughters, we know that they're both XX, right? And we know they have at least one big H allele because they're both healthy. All right, and then when we continue on with our pedigree, let's say this daughter right here marries somebody, right, and marries a healthy male, right? So he's a healthy male, so he's X, big H, and then Y, and then they have a couple kids too. And let's say they have 3 kids. They have one son who has hemophilia, and then 2 daughters, right? And then by the same process, by looking at the kids, we can determine the genotypes of the parents, right? Because this son right here, if he's a guy, he's XY, and then he has hemophilia, so he has the recessive allele on his X chromosome, so he's X little h. And remember, since he's a guy, he got the Y chromosome from his dad, right? So his dad gives him the Y chromosome, meaning that he has to get the X chromosome from his mom. And since his X chromosome has a little h, that means mom has to have an X chromosome with a little h as well. Okay? So the thing to remember with sex-linked disorders is that you usually see the trait pop up more in guys than in girls. Because in guys, you only get one copy of the X chromosome, so you only have one chance to either get the healthy or disorder gene. Whereas for females, you have 2 copies, so you have 2 chances to have a healthy allele. And if the dominant trait is healthy, then you have a much better chance of being healthy if you're a girl. So for sex-linked recessive disorders, most of the times you're going to see more of the disorder in guys than you do in girls, right? And so these are just 2 different patterns of genetic inheritance that can affect what the pedigree will look like. So far we've talked about autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, which was the Huntington's, and then sex-linked recessive, which is the hemophilia. And they all have different patterns of inheritance, but as long as you know how the genetics works and how what recessive and dominant means and how the crosses will work out, it should be pretty easy to figure out how to draw the pedigrees and how to work out the family history based on the genetics involved.